up, guys? Ready to fire, ready or not, we letting it on.
There's nothing you can do. RNG are your nightmare.
Set it off like this, set it off like this.
Hello and welcome back to MSI 2022 in Busan, South Korea. Here we see T1 and EG arriving at the arena, getting ready for day 3 of the Rumble stage. A lot of really important matchups as we close out the first round robin
Their
of the
car
Rumble
looks slick.
stage.
Is that just me? There's the slow-mo, sliding open.
Yeah.
It's fancy.
You gotta have a dramatic entrance,
Yeah.
right? Being one of the best players in the world. Here we see EG, tall order ahead of them as they will go up against T1 in that first matchup of the day. Lots of exciting games in store. I'm Dash, that's Lyric, that's Azael. You guys ready to do this thing?
Oh, yeah.
All righty.
100%.
Here we go. Now, the competition is heating up, and what would an international competition be without a little bit of trash talk? And, of course, it's got to be Jojo Pyun continuing the smack talk unabated. The man doesn't stop.
I just love it. I mean, because he's getting roasted by the fans. Like, he's getting slapped by EU, but he's still tweeting out, scheduled tweet. EU is so easy. I have time to alt-tab and tweet in-game. Knowing full well he's probably going to lose the game. It's just fun to see an LCS player, the youngest guy at the tournament, come here with a little bit of swagger, a little bit of cockiness, and I think he's actually playing pretty darn well.
Yeah, and I mean, just overall, right? I mean, everyone's having fun with it, whether it's owners like Carlos, other pro players respect him for doing it, maybe upsetting some fans, but it's like, this is the personality I feel like we need, especially coming from, you know, maybe regions that don't have the best results, but can still give fans someone to cheer for and believe in.
Absolutely. He's redefining the trash talk meta. You got to wonder how much further can he take it. He's scheduled to tweet. I'm waiting for him to get a whole social media team on, on retainer, where they're just tweeting out responses as
Someone
the game
throws
is
him a
playing
phone on
live.
stage, he catches it,
Exactly.
he tweets after he first
That'd be
bloods you.
so brilliant. So brilliant. Just a little bit of fun to kick off our day, but now let's turn our attention to the rest of the table. The first round robin of the group stage will end today. It is an important day for Saigon Buffaloes, who find themselves at the bottom of the table. Of course, G2 Esports sitting pretty at 4-0, followed just behind by RNG. And then, interestingly, that tie between T1 and EG to be broken today in that first matchup, vying for third place. Things are interesting here, Lyric.
Today's really crazy, but I love just you starting off with Buffalo, right? Because, I mean, 0-4, I'm actually kind of surprised, right? This was the team that I said was going to be one of the most dangerous teams coming into the group stage. But, I mean, you hit it on it earlier backstage. A cornered Buffalo, that's a scary thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Right, exactly. It's while it is looking dire for them, they are dangerous for exactly that reason. Yeah. When your back is against the wall, you're just going to throw fire at fire.
I mean, their bot lane has proven that they are world class. I think there's some work to do on the rest of the map at times, but this is an incredibly important day for them. They're already 0-4. They're 2 games back and forth. They play EG today, so if you want to make it to the knockout stage, you've got to start picking up wins today.
Yeah, not counting them out just yet. Another team that we have to talk about when it comes to struggles is T1. Again, the surprise that they're even finding themselves in the position here 4 games in to be tied for third place and really having a battle to make sure they avoid a 1-4 matchup in the semifinals.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking. I mean, it sounds funny because they've only played 2 games against major regions, but they haven't beaten a major region at the event yet, right? They have their opportunity to beat EG in the first matchup of the day, but if they lose to EG, like, the sky is falling for this team and for the LCK.
Yeah, and I think it just opens up so many questions, right, about, I mean, obviously it looks super good in their domestic region, right? The run that they had can't be taken away from them no matter how they do here, but still a very slow start for T1. A lot of young players, right, coming onto the international stage, but we need to see them step up today.
And a hot start in the group stage, right? But to your point, Azael, a bit of stumbles here in the Rumble stage, and so we'll have to see how they recover moving into the day. We're going to touch a lot more on T1 as they do go up against EG in our first matchup of the day. But from here, I want to flip back to a little bit of a meta touch. We don't need to talk about too much today, but the meta in the bot lane is developing with Kaisa and Ezreal Fever breaking out in the Rumble stage. Lore was able to catch up with Gala after his match in the Verizon post-game interview to get his thoughts on the Daughter of the Void's dominance.
You mentioned the late game, which makes me want to talk about Kaisa, because this is one of the most OP champ right now on the bot lane, and I know that you're a really good fan of Kaisa. What kind of advantage it gives you that this champion is so strong right now? And tell me about the matchup versus Ezreal, please.
我觉得卡莎，本身是一个 是一个就是可以就是自己保命的英雄吧，就完全不需要队友创造输出环境，就完全可以自身寻找输出环境的一个英雄。就在打团的时候会很好，然后在面对伊泽瑞尔的时候，其实伊泽瑞尔因为卡莎非常的灵活嘛，然后打团的时候其实伊泽瑞尔很难就是技能消耗到，然后打起来的时候，如果大招就是后期的话，大招突到就是伊泽瑞尔的旁边，就是伊泽瑞尔单挑也基本是不可能打赢的，所以如果拖到后期的话，这个英雄面对伊泽瑞尔胜率是很高的。
I feel like for Kai'Sa, this champion herself really can have a very good survivability, which is very crucial for the marksman. So with Kai'Sa, I can really seek more opportunities in the actual game to do more damage. And also Kai'Sa can perform so good in actual team fight. And facing against Azael, I feel like Azael is very hard to make the poke on Kai'Sa. And maybe we can drag into the late game. So after in the late game, I think Azael is very hard to make the 1v1 fight against Kai'Sa. So I think Kai'Sa got a very decent win rate against Azael for the bot lane matchup.
I see. Well, thank you so much for this insight on the bot lane matchup.
It's awesome to hear from a top-tier, world-class AD carry on the matchup specifically, but a few things very specifically jump out to me. Number one, the survivability of the champion. And while you could argue that Ezreal can match that kind of survivability, the extra addition to that conversation is, as he said, the 1v1. When Kai'Sa is able to get on top of the Ezreal in the late game, it is very rare that you would ever see an Ezreal outplay that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen this in a lot of games. We've seen Gala do it himself. We saw Flakked do that against EG. You know, if you can get the plasma onto the Ezreal, dive in on the Ezreal. Ezreal just cannot win this 1v1 and has to play so safely in these team fights because if you ever get tagged, Kai'Sa's in and you're dead.
Yeah, and I feel like just overall in the meta, right, she feels like such a staple when you have so many compositions that just want to dive onto the backline, right? With the Wukong being so strong, the LeBlanc, another champion that could dive in with the Kai'Sa. And I mean, even those champions against Kai'Sa, right, you have things like your ultimate to reposition and get away from those engages.
Exactly, and so it kind of makes sense that we're starting to see the AD carry meta warp around that Kai'Sa, and it speaks to the 4-1 record that she holds over Ezreal matchups. And so
3-0 yesterday.
You're right, and we entered day one talking a lot about Tristana, and while we have seen the Tristana come out, we've even seen a couple Kallistas, it seems more and more that teams are starting to recognize the power of those two picks, but specifically the Kai'Sa. Now, we have two of the best Kaisas of the tournament so far in Flakked and Gala. They're going to be facing off in Game 5 later tonight in our featured matchup presented by Mercedes-Benz.
It seems as if both of these teams are destined to have an international tug-of-war over the MSI title.
RNG! Destroy Dom Kia!
And despite RNG winning last time, G2 are back on their feet and ready to try and take it back.
I think Caps is back to clubs. He is like brings a lot of confidence into the team and as well a lot of fun and sometimes a little bit of trolling as well.
The scariest thing for a competitive League of Legends player is seeing Caps with a grin on his face. Last time these teams faced off, Claps was unleashed.
Going right back in, Wukong for the knockup on a one. Stopwatch burn, and down goes Samu. Oh, he's healing, he's staying alive. True shot barrage. Gala playing to his limits, but ignited and falls. And G2 mop the floor with RNG.
But RNG with Xiaohu returning to the mid lane this year are the reigning MSI champions and flagship of their region.
Gala gonna pick up yet another kill. It's a double, it's a triple, is it a quadra, is it a penta? Gala's gonna get it again! The penta kill for Gala!
Today, they look to even the score versus G2 in this featured matchup presented by Mercedes-Benz.
I think having fun is G2's superpower, yeah.
You better take notes! It's MSI and G2 are back!
Will RNG be able to finally take down G2, or will the unstoppable force just keep on rolling?
The defending MSI champions in RNG up against the talk of the tournament, the undefeated G2. While this might not be the battle for the trophy just yet, in so many ways, Azael, this does feel like the battle for first place in the Rumble stage.
I mean, it absolutely is, right? Both these teams beat T1. You know, G2 already took them down once, so if RNG want to have their fate in their hands, they have to be able to take down G2 here. And we all know there's been so much talk about the big three teams at this tournament, so getting first place is really important to get an easier matchup in the knockout stage. RNG has got to be on point today.
Yeah, I feel like just even the momentum, right, going into the second stage, being able to, you know, dodge either G2 or T1 themselves, be able to get there, play maybe an easier matchup, but just even the confidence going into a best of 5, I think would be huge. And even on the other end for G2, being able to come out having 2-0'd the previous MSI champions would be such a huge win for them.
Yeah, and when we talk about that undefeated streak, there is so much momentum that goes along with it, right? And for RNG, similarly, if they could hand that first loss to G2 just to make them stumble, just to make them think for a moment, you know, about their own maybe fallacies, which they haven't been exposed to just yet, that could work wonders.
I mean, these two teams have just been so exciting, and it does feel like, you know, out of the 4 major region teams, these are the ones that are adapting best. These are the ones I think feel most at home in this current meta, where, you know, EG and T1 have been kind of falling behind, you know, not able to adapt as quickly.
And that's what brings me back to our feature matchup presented by Mercedes-Benz between the two 80 carries. You've got Gala on one side, who, no surprise, is a top performer and expected to be. But on the other side of the matchup, Lyric, I think in some ways a bit of a surprise here on the international stage. Flakked stepping up in such a huge way.
I know, coming in out of nowhere, right, Azael? Flakked coming in, he shows up. You know, G2 and Flakked not really having necessarily the best regular season performance, having to wait till that playoff run to really show up. But here, I just love the aggression. I love the decisiveness coming out from him. Always willing to go in, follow up the aggression of other members like Caps and Targamas, and he's really just been stepping up.
I mean, G2 bot lane has just taken it to another level when you compare to the regular season, where a lot of people are saying, yeah, G2's good, but bot lane's kind of a liability. They're not going to be able to hold up internationally. They're not going to be able to kind of do this. Then they had the lower bracket run. They looked incredible, and they've jumped onto the international scene and just been amazing. Flakked in particular, how aggressive, how confident he is playing, especially on picks like the Kaisa, is just so damn fun to watch.
So while undoubtedly we will have a spotlight on these two players, particularly in the mid to late, where those 80 carries become hyper relevant, Azael, it's about getting there. And when it comes to G2, a person who has played a phenomenal and tremendous role in getting them there has, of course, been G2's Jankos. And I believe you've got a couple of creative jungle paths to break down for us.
Exactly. I mean, to me, it's just been about Jankos kind of bucking the trend. And G2 in general, as we're going to see in this neighborhood tactics presented by State Farm, they like to do things that are a little bit atypical. They're willing to skip camps. They're willing to do some aggressive moves. So we're going to run through a couple of these games. And to start this off, we can see this is a game against Order. Order going to be leashing on bot side. They're playing against an Evelyn. They want to look to punish this early. So Jankos, he's just going to do a 3-clamp clear on top side. You can see that mid lane being pushed in here by Caps. Going to be able to join up. Kevy moves up. Jankos is already looking for the invade. You can see they had this warded out over at the red buff. And Caps with the push, he's simply going to move on in. They're going to collapse onto Kevy, look to punish this Evelyn very early on. Kevy goes on the run, but Caps is already there. The chain connects. They're going to be able to get a pretty easy first blood here. A lot of people are just not counting on these invades, not counting on these aggressive paths that G2 has been consistently looking for here. Once again, you can see Lee Sin inspired starting up here on the red buff. That is warded out. Jankos going to be starting over on the blue. He is getting that leash from Broken Blade. And he's again going to look for a gank here, you know, coming from the top side of the map, doing a 3-camp clear into a gank without red buff is very atypical here. And you can see Jojo Pion, he's actually quite healthy at this point, has a slight health lead there on Caps, lane going okay, albeit very early stages. But Jankos now here on the wraparound, again, no red buff. He's playing Wukong. A lot of people were just expecting you to either come from bot side with the red buff or just do a full 6-camp clear, reset, look to play it out. But no, Jankos straight through mid. This one does not get a kill. But look at Jojo Pion's health at the end of this. Went from a slight health advantage to an absolutely lost lane. This is putting Caps in that position to really excel. We know Caps with the lead is pretty much unstoppable. And Jankos has been very, very consistently able to get him those advantages. It's just been so fun to watch. And you have to also take note of the fact that Jankos is not spending a lot of time for these ganks. He's doing 3 quick camps right through mid, gets a kill or gets some summoners or an HP advantage, and then he's right back to farming. Again, here, this one is against SGB. Jankos, again, 3-camp clear, no red buff, playing Graves, going to look for the wraparound here, all the way over onto Froggy. Caps is actually already trading very aggressively here, trying to prep for this. And Caps also deserves credit. He's done a great job of actually curating the waves and setting up the wave state to be perfect for these ganks. This one gonna result in even more as Caps is able to go in there on Froggy. He flashes in, lands the charm. Jankos shows up, gets the first blood. everything coming up G2 here. The confetti's falling from the sky. It's just been really, really fun to see. And I think teams are going to have to give much more respect to these early looks. Like, is the pathing that crazy? You know, is the play itself that crazy? No, it looks relatively simple, but it's the fact that he's coming at unexpected timings. He's getting these ganks off around 220, 230, sometimes very, very early on in the game. And he's coming from a side of the map that mid laners just aren't ready for, because who ganks you without red buff at level 3 on Graves? Like, no one's doing it. So you could say, oh, well, that's not a good gank. That's not efficient. That's a stupid gank. It shouldn't work. But people are creatures of habit, and they play around timings, they play around ward timings, they expect the ganks to come in from certain angles, from certain times, and he's breaking those trends, and G2 are doing so well with that.
First off, consider this my petition to have a confetti shower added into the game as, like,
really
as a first blood kill finisher. I think that should just always be the case. Beyond that, though, I love the point you're making, right? And how at times it does result in a kill, other times it does not. But in either case, it is extraordinarily effective. Also, the first replay in which the jungler becomes the target, and on all different champions, Wukong to Graves to even some of those aggressive early ganking junglers, it's going to make every opponent think differently about how to approach G2. Every laner is now going to be second-guessing their wave state and their warding and the vision of the team. And so an incredibly creative player who, by all accounts, has gotten G2 off on the right foot in a majority of games.
I mean, it's the reason why, you know, Jankos has had so much longevity, right? Just being able to consistently look for these types of plays, work so well with his laners. And again, just these are plays that are very hard to predict and play around. So I think it's gonna be really hard for other teams to adapt and even learn, like, what the counter answers are.
And one of the coolest things is, even if Jankos goes into a game with no plan on ganking, does a 6-clam clear, take scuttle and recalls,
right?
People have to play scared. They're not going to play their lanes as aggressively because, like, well, all these other times, you know, he did this early kind of cheesy gank, and it's just so smart to mix in that play.
You gotta love it. It's the cerebralness, the creativity of the jungle role, and how much effect you can have by playing through the fog, lack of information, and things like that. Of course, this has been a big piece of G2's success so far here at MSI, and that in and of itself, their success has been such a massive part of the community conversation. People are wildly excited about the undefeated streak of G2. So let's talk about that for just a minute. We're very lucky that production was able to whip this cute little graphic up for us from last night to today. Here is their performance so far at MSI. Now remember that they had a 12-0 win streak coming into this point. 4-0 over Order, 4-0 over EG in the group stage. They've now taken their first wins over RNG, EG, T1, and SGB in the Rumble stage. We are going to update this graphic. We're going to track this as it goes for the potential undefeated run for the entire MSI title. It will only get more difficult, though, Azael, as things go on. They would have to end with a total 36 wins in a row in order to take the MSI title without dropping one.
I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. And you come into the event and you're like, well, that's, of course, the win streak's going to end. But every game that they play, you start to believe a little bit more, and you're like, well, maybe.
Yeah.
And it is going to get harder and harder, though. You know, the opponents are going to get more difficult. Best of 5 is going to be a string of games against top teams that is going to be hard to kind of remain perfect. But I mean, G2 is just on fire.
Yeah, and I gotta say, even if it is hard or unlikely that they can at least go with, like, the perfect streak, right? The fact that they've had this streak now, if they can go on to win the event, I mean, it still looks absolutely fantastic.
Historic.
And yeah, just absolutely historic. Beating teams like T1, beating teams like RNG to get it done, just absolutely wild.
Now, G2 is sitting pretty currently in the Rumble stage. Let's talk a little bit about what else we have in store, though, today by pulling up our schedule. A reminder to the viewers, the game number 1 Sports Evil Geniuses versus T1 before G2 steps onto the stage for the first time today to close out their first round robin against PSG Town. We got Royal Never Give Up versus Saigon Buffaloes in that third game of the day, and we'll close things out with a slew of games sporting T1 versus PSG, RNG versus G2, and EG versus Saigon Buffaloes.
I mean, EG versus T1 is a battle for third, and no one was expecting T1 to be in that position. If EG takes them, I think the discussion is going to only be about T1 and what has happened to them, because they have not yet won against a major region here. People were expecting them to be the heavy favorites.
Yeah, and I even just think the discussion coming into Rumble stage, right, was like, okay, we have a top 3 and a clear bottom 3. EG, in my opinion, have already separated themselves from
that's
PSG.
out the window
exactly. Already separated themselves from PSG and Buffalo. T1 not stepping up. honestly, like EG might be underdogs, but I definitely think they can get it done.
It's starting to feel like G2 has solidified themselves as the team to beat. I think we will wait to see the first round robin fully closed to be super definitive about that. But then, yes, it is a lot less of a top 3, bottom 3, and more like a 1-3-2 or 1-2-1-2.
Yeah.
It's a lot tougher, which is very cool to see here.
Like a soup, if you ask Mark Z.
Oh, Mark Z, where you at? Hopefully you're awake. Tweet us if you are. Okay, our first matchup of the day is EG versus T1. And earlier this week on Dysphoria, the guys broke down how T1 is bringing a different style to the world stage.
Love that show.
It's I
think they all play the games in different ways, and they all have kind of different strengths and different approaches to the games. And it's not even really like the traditional ways that you would think about the regions, right? Everyone thinks about LCK, all right, you're like super slow, you're methodical, you're playing for late, you're waiting for your opponents to make mistakes, and then you're crushing them with really good macro. You know, LPL, you're the madmen, you're just going all in early and you're fight, right? Like these teams are kind of bucking the trend of what their region does. T1 really is the like out hands you team, I think.
Yeah.
You know, they are so much about early game focus, about actually prepping their waves perfectly.
That's why they added all the zoomers.
Yep. Moving around the map and actually punishing on these perfectly stacked waves. You know, they trim it, they time the waves, they time these rotations so well, having FLICKR move around, you know, so much of an emphasis on farming plates for Gumayushi, you know, putting resources into getting him and Keria ahead. Keria is not this like madman roaming around the map as much. He mostly doesn't even really go to top lane very often. It's been more this focus, you know, especially in the regular season and playoffs, about just like getting Gumayushi to the stage. And they're so good individually that they kind of just like run over teams in the early game just through laning prowess, right?
Yeah.
Lyric, I want to pull you into this same exact conversation because I think everything that Azael said is undoubtedly true. And we've seen that.
That's a good point.
Thanks for killing my momentum there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
It's undoubtedly true, right? And they've approached this MSI tournament the same way that they approached competition domestically, but the results are not the same. And I think that's where we have to start to call into question what is happening. Why isn't T1 finding the same success that they found regionally while playing in a similar fashion here on the international stage?
Yeah, I mean, even the early games, right, have still been phenomenal across the board. It's really just been once we've gotten to those mid games where I feel like they still had like similar issues domestically, but we're now at an event where teams can punish, where sure, they find this big gold lead against G2, but G2 come out with this creative draft, much stronger, and able to prevent T1 from like forcing and having any agency to be able to close out games. And I gotta be honest though, the RNG loss I think is the more surprising one, just with how scrappy that one was, and maybe just something T1 didn't expect.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. They're just being challenged in different ways, right? You know, they slapped down the first pick TF. G2's like, nope, can't do that. Diana Yasuo, right? You know, they're gonna punish you in that way. In the RNG game, I think that T1 maybe wasn't fully ready for how willing RNG was to scrap. Like, they were just going to fight over everything no matter what. Bin was willing to fight even when Bin shouldn't have been fighting, but Gala and Xiaohu were ready to scrap at all stages, and they were unassailed throughout that game. They were really hard to stop, and they just got so fed. And eventually, the game is just 5v5, 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 and these carries took over.
Yeah, and I was talking to Chronicler yesterday, and he was saying there was one fight specifically where T1 have already secured the Drake. So T1 aren't the type of team, or in the LCK it doesn't happen, where a team is then going to force the fight after the objective's already gone. But in LPL, this happens quite often, and I've talked to LPL coaches about this, and they think you can even use the objective knowing, hey, we aren't going to contest the objective, but we can use that to get the better position for the fight. And just like Chronicler said, T1 obviously wasn't ready for that type of aggression.
I mean, I think you can even look at some of the Herald plays where T1 was trying to do these kind of like light 4-man contests, where in the LCK, I think, as you say, people would have been maybe more happy to just take the Herald and then back off. But RNG is like, you're here with less people? We're fighting, right? And they're going to take those kills.
Well, I think that's perfect to, again, kind of put against these goal differences that we see, right? Because within the LCK, generally building a 3.6K goal difference at 14 minutes, they're basically keeping pace with themselves here on the MSI stage, but it is every minute beyond that where they seem to be coming up against a little bit more resistance, a little bit more willingness to test them and those hands that we talk about them having. And when we talk about hands, this man behind us definitely has them. Zeus, I think, no surprise, has continued to be a top performer for the squad, but in so many ways is kind of the individual that I want to call out here on the international stage for T1 as perhaps being the best.
Yeah, I've just loved watching him play. His lane dominance is just so extraordinary. He can do it, with resources if Owner and FLICKR want to come help him out, or he can do it completely by himself, picks the crazy, volatile counter matchup, bringing out things like the Irelia, and even just bringing his leads into the mid game. I don't necessarily feel like it's like Azael's problem or an individual problem. It's kind of like bringing everything together. But individually, this man can push his lead forward by himself.
He absolutely can. And I mean, I think that T1 have a lot of incredible individuals. To me, I haven't really watched individual play from T1 and been like, wow, you really suck. Like everyone is playing really well individually as far as like the mechanics, I think for the most part. Gumayusi, maybe there's some criticism there. But to me, it's been more about how the team is working as a whole, whether their draft priorities are right, whether how they're actually playing on the map is correct. And I think in some ways, they weren't challenged as much in the LCK because they were so dominant that when you come here and you're playing against G2 and RNG who can push you, you have to have some of these bad habits exposed before you can really fix them.
Yeah, as I praise Zeus, I don't want to overlook Broken Blade's performance. However, filling very different roles and styles for their teams. I guess my next question becomes, when you look at the struggles that T1 has had and how they recover or start that positive uphill climb throughout the tournament, would you recommend or would you feel that it has to come from this guy? Is it about investing more resources into your best performing member at the tournament? Or is it about relying on him to do what he's done, Lyric, and going elsewhere?
Yeah, it's always, I think, an interesting question for every team in League is do we invest in covering our weakness? Not to say their bot lane is a weakness, right? But the weakest performance.
That carrier guy. Kind of sure of that weakness down there.
But right, do you help enable the ones who are struggling, or do you just push your strength even further? I think it can work either way, but Azael, you had a pretty strong opinion on this in rehearsal earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that they should do what has worked for them for so long, right? And that has been, more allow Zeus and Owner to do their thing, but focus on Gumayusi, getting him ahead. This guy is incredible. Keria, pretty much everyone had as the best player in the world coming into the event. That has not really changed, though Caps is the best performing member here. I think they should do what's really worked for them.
I think it'll be interesting to kind of pull that idea into the conversation of this first matchup as we kind of flip over to the EG side of things. A team that domestically, Azael, found most of their success when they finally landed on a style in playoffs, and that style revolved around their bot lane.
Exactly. I mean, it was Jinx Aphelios, similar for T1. That doesn't really work here anymore, so teams are having to change. And EG really did struggle with their drafting in the regular season. If you only watch playoffs, you saw them go, 12-1 in the bot lane, or sorry, in the lower bracket run. They crushed through. You're like, all right, they have it all figured out. They lost every single game against the top 3 in the regular season, and it wasn't really clicking until they found their style. And they haven't been able to do that yet here, but they have maintained a lot of these drafting struggles. They haven't looked confident. LeBlanc left up, Wukong left up. They're not even trading OPs because they're so concerned, I think, about potential counter picks. Like, what if Caps brings out Lysandra? Well, if you give over everything and you allow your opponents to dictate the draft, you're always going to be in a losing position.
Yeah, it's kind of weird too, right? Because you're kind of hitting on them being afraid of these counter picks coming out and trying to get in a better position in laning phase, but it kind of leaves them with worse drafts and worse lanes and just worse picks overall, even though they're trying to go for the opposite.
Yeah, they hit 1 of 5 here for us. I think we like the Mord pick in this draft specifically, but the rest left something to be desired, and so we'll have to see whether or not they can do the same thing they did in the postseason in the LCS and work their way towards a style that fits in this meta specifically. And that is where I will bring us all the way back to that conversation that we had around the AD carries, the Kai'Sa, the Ezreal meta. Obviously, this game here, it was Danny playing the Ezreal side of things, but let's not forget that he can perform as well on a Kai'Sa pick, and I have to wonder if they're going to start to look to secure that more often around him, as he, of the 2 young members on EG, seems to be the one that is struggling more on the international stage.
Yeah, and even if it doesn't come down to his performance maybe improving on the pick of Kai'Sa itself, I think the thing that's great about Kai'Sa is, again, it puts the agency in his hands. He has to more proactively and more aggressively look for plays, and I think if you're on champions like that, if those plays work out, that's going to give you confidence to keep going for those similar plays.
And while we want to see more from Danny, Azael, that man on your screen there, Jojo, the youngest player at the tournament, I think for many has actually impressed in his individual performance.
I think so. I think my expectations were pretty high for him, and I feel like he's been meeting them. Yes, Caps has been dominating, but Caps has been dominating everyone. Yeah. And when you look at the last 3 games that he played in the Rumble stage, his TF, his Rise, and his LeBlanc, even if you didn't like the individual picks, I think he piloted them very well. He has looked more and more confident throughout the stage. So this is just exciting to see a 17-year-old, NA talent here, I think, performing at a very high level internationally.
Those are some pretty sweet statistics right there. That is a lot of attention, though,
He's
from the
involved
jungle.
in it
I'm a
all.
little surprised.
Exactly. All the kills completely revolving around him or him being a part of it. And that's the confidence we were talking about with Danny JoJo is showing.
I am surprised to say, but excited to say, that this seems like a battle for third place for EG and T1. Without further ado, let's kick off day 3 of the Rumble stage.